Okay, let's jump right in. Think about women's rights today. I mean, women can officially work in any profession, they vote, they live completely independently. But if we rewind to Canada in the late 1800s, it is literally a different world. No voting in provincial or federal elections, forget about traveling alone after dark. There were even strict societal rules dictating that women basically had to wear restrictive long skirts and dresses. Their actual ability to influence the world around them was, well, it was incredibly tightly controlled.
So, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into how early Canadian women's movements flat out refused to just accept those restrictions. And they didn't just operate in silos either. They strategically joined forces. We are going to look specifically at the powerful intersection of the suffrage movement, the temperance movement, and social gospel values, and see exactly how these groups gained unprecedented political influence.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, women in the late 1800s. Second, the social gospel movement. Third, fighting the liquor traffic. Fourth, the push for suffrage. Fifth, uniting for political power. And finally, number 6, the price of unity.
Let's get right to Section 1, Women in the Late 1800s, the Catalyst for Change. Rapid industrialization in the late 1800s kind of changed everything. It pushed all these young, single, working-class women to leave their families behind for jobs in city factories or as domestic servants. And this massive urban shift created some truly desperate poverty. In response to this, middle-class women stepped up. They sought to cure these societal ills through volunteering and creating charities. They set up missions in the absolute poorest neighborhoods, providing things like free kindergartens and English classes. Basically, women were stepping out of the home and right onto the front lines of urban poverty. Moving on to Section 2, the social gospel movement, a moral duty to cure societal ills. This brings us to the social gospel movement. Now, what was this exactly? Well, it was a movement driven by Protestants in the late 1800s, aimed at making Christian churches way more responsive to major social problems, like that massive poverty we just talked about. The social gospel promoted this idea that society could actively be improved, but only if everyone worked together to apply Protestant values, things like hard work and living a very well-controlled life, to overcome these harmful societal issues. They genuinely believed that helping others live better lives would in turn create a better society for everyone. And the driving force behind this was the harsh realization that the old methods, they just weren't cutting it anymore. Leaders like Reverend J.S. Woodsworth realized traditional church methods simply weren't enough to combat modern poverty, unemployment, and crime. Just listen to what he said in 1911. The church's program was, quote, too limited for the acute social problems found in the city. They realized they needed to take tangible, aggressive social action. Which leads us to Section 3, fighting the liquor traffic, the targeted strike against alcohol. Now, a huge target of this social action was alcohol. The Women's Christian Temperance Union pushed out some intense propaganda during this era. They believed, absolutely to their core, that alcohol abuse led directly to family violence and high crime rates. The messaging was crystal clear. A town where alcohol was freely available was chaotic, violent, and incredibly dangerous. But a town that voted for a local alcohol ban, that town was depicted as prosperous, peaceful, a place where families could walk safely past thriving stores. Banning alcohol perfectly aligned with the social gospel's ultimate goal of living a well-controlled moral life. Section 4, the push for suffrage, the foundational fight for the ballot. But here's the catch. To actually secure these local alcohol bans, women realized they needed leverage. Suffragettes like Dr. Emily Stowe, who, by the way, was initially denied admission to medical school in Toronto simply because she was a woman, realized that without political and educational equality, women just couldn't enforce systemic change. So the Canadian Women's Suffrage Association campaigned not just for the vote, but for women to be able to study in universities and become professionals. They knew that relying solely on charity was just a band-aid. They needed a permanent seat at the legislative table.
Section 5, uniting for political power, the intersection of moral and political goals.
Let's map out exactly how these groups gained that political influence because it's a brilliant, logical domino effect. Step 1, to actually cure poverty and support families, they needed real social programs. Step 2, those programs require actual government funding and supportive legislation. Step 3, to get that legislation, politicians have to actually listen to you. And step 4, how do you force a politician to listen? You become a voter. Women realized they absolutely had to win the ballot to force political action. Suddenly, supporting women's suffrage wasn't just a separate issue. It became the ultimate tool to achieve both social gospel and temperance goals.
You can actually feel the energy of this realization in a 1905 Methodist Conference report. They declared that to do, quote, permanent work, we must enter the field of politics, and by the exercise of that God-given privilege, the ballot, smite the liquor traffic to the death. That phrase, smite the liquor traffic to the death, it just perfectly captures the exact moment these moral religious reformers officially transformed into fierce political warriors. They understood the sheer power of the vote, and by 1914, national church conferences across Canada were openly supporting women's suffrage.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Section 6. The price of unity. Facing internal friction and exclusion. On the surface, these broad coalitions looked incredibly unified and powerful. Take Lady Aberdeen, for example, the president of the National Council of Women of Canada. She firmly believed that to help the country, women needed to unify as broadly as possible, to tackle everything from domestic science and the arts all the way to urban poverty. But the reality was a lot messier. An 1894 letter from Lady Aberdeen reveals how this expectation of unity clashed heavily with deep-seated religious prejudices and single-issue narrow-mindedness. She wrote about a narrow Protestant faction in Ontario that actually feared being considered, quote, disloyal if they joined a council broad enough to allow Jewish and Ukrainian women to join. Plus, the single-issue focus of some groups caused major tension. Temperance advocates, for instance, heavily criticized Lady Aberdeen's council simply for allowing wine at their dinners. They refused to compromise, even to build a broader political alliance. And it gets worse. This push for unity across mainstream organizations largely excluded women of color entirely due to deep-rooted racial prejudices. Because they were shut out of these white, upper and middle-class organizations, Black women strategically formed their own powerful groups. A really prime example of this is the Colored Women's Club of Montreal, which was founded in 1902 by the wives of Black porters. They actively fought poverty and discrimination directly themselves. They provided winter clothing for families arriving from the Caribbean, they helped the homeless, and they even helped found Montreal's oldest Black church. Basically, they built their own powerful intersectional movement when the mainstream door was completely closed to them.
So, as we wrap up this explainer on how intersecting movements, from suffrage to the social gospel to temperance, managed to secure massive political power in the past, we really have to look toward the future. We've seen how they leveraged social causes to demand the ballot, and how they navigated some pretty deep internal divisions. So, the question I want to leave you with today is this. Looking at our world right now, are there areas where women today still face inequality? And how can this historical blueprint of overlapping, united movements be used to tackle the crises of our own era? Something to think about. Thanks so much for learning with me today.